So first of all, thanks for everyone for joining the session. My name is Yalın, as Clive introduced, and I spent the last 7 years at YouTube. And the reason I really delved a lot more into brand narrative, which is what we're talking about today, is because my last role at YouTube and what I've really fought for at YouTube and managed to get it as a content vertical on its own was public figures, so celebrities. And as we think of them and as we approached them while I was at YouTube, we really think of them as brands, and they are brands, right? So when you approach a celebrity who have a public persona, it's very much managing a brand, and it's managing a brand narrative. So I learned a lot through that experience. So a lot of what I'm going to share with you today is kind of based on that, but it can be really taken and really utilized by brands who don't necessarily have a personality attached to them, but you can really use and evoke those emotional storytelling in your brand narrative as well. So like I said, I spent 7 years at YouTube, and in January, I actually set up a advisory and consulting company called Navivest with 2 other co-founders with very different backgrounds, because what we wanted to do is bring together a roster of experts. And we're really focusing more on startups, I should say, but we also work with brands depending on what they need. But we're essentially an advisory and consulting firm now. But obviously, we started the company in January, and then all of this happened. But as they say, it's never a good time to start a business. So we're doing well. And I keep reminding myself that actually some of the world's best companies were born out of crises. So we hope to believe we are one of them.
Yeah, no, that's very, very true. Before we get sort of look at your main presentation, can I just ask, we're using this term brand narrative, and it feels to me that some of us may have differing ideas about what that means. Just to get us clear and agreed on that one, how would you define brand narrative in this context?
Sure. The way I would define brand narrative is brand narrative is essentially the web. Let's think of it that way. That connects all of your comms, all of your marketing efforts, all of your product efforts, everything really in one storytelling, in one brand. And it's really driven by your values and your mission. So it goes beyond just selling a product or a service. And it's more about creating a connection with consumers, with who you stand as a brand. And then you employ that brand narrative in different shapes and forms, like big marketing campaigns or small videos that you do, or your social media, right? How you decide to communicate on social media. And most importantly, you all have a brand narrative, right? Whether or not you like it, whether or not you're on a platform or not. This is why when social media happened a long time ago now, a lot of brands didn't really involve. And now every single brand is on social media, because what they realize is if you omit yourself from that conversation, other people are building your narrative for you, and you have no control over it. The whole idea of it is that you should be in control of your narrative. And I'll give you a lot of examples throughout the session that will hopefully get some creative juices flowing, because today we're really going to focus on storytelling, tenets of storytelling, and the why and the how, because that's really where everything starts. It's like the foundation, I would say, of a great YouTube presence. Today, I'm going to cover the tenets of storytelling, and I'll tell you why. I'll start there, first of all, why we're talking about storytelling. And then we'll go into the why and the how of YouTube, and then we'll do a Q&A. So when I think of the tenets of storytelling, I wanted to start with an example. I would have loved to, normally when I present this, I would have done it in person. I would have said, who has seen this 9-page Apple marketing spread from January 1983? But I can't see any of you. So most likely, usually in the room, nobody has seen it. But this is an actual marketing campaign that Steve Jobs ran when they came up with the personal computer called Lisa. And this was he took a 9-page ad in the New York Times, and this completely flopped because it was all geek speak. Anybody outside of NASA didn't really get it. And sadly, Steve Jobs was fired after this. Lisa only sold 10,000 units. Fast forward 14 years, Steve Jobs comes back to Apple, and his first marketing campaign when he comes back is what you see on your screen. This is what graced the New York Times pages. This is what graced billboards across America. And you will know that that Think Different mission, I would say, is still used by Apple. And what they're trying to do here is very interestingly is, and Apple's the king of this, right? They're not selling you a product. There's no product in this. There's no geek speak. They're selling you an emotion, and they're actually connecting you with the wonderful people that you see on these posters and telling you, if you want to be like these people, you have to think different. And Apple thinks different. So you can be one of these inspirational people yourself via Apple. It's a very, very strong narrative. This is storytelling in a printed form. And I wanted to start here because it's a very traditional marketing campaign that a lot of marketers will be used to thinking about when they communicate their brand. So I wanted to start here. So what we really take away from it is, people don't buy the best product, they buy the best story. If people bought the best product, you would only have one product out there that would be the best of that category and everybody would buy that product. That's not the case. We all know there's loads of options and people buy the best story, especially with the direct-to-consumer startups that we're looking at, for instance. They're all trying to build the best story, not necessarily the best product. And what's really, really important, especially nowadays, is that the best story gets you customer loyalty and pipeline. And why I say nowadays is because we're going through a very tough times, obviously, and you may find it really hard to get new customers right now. But what you can do is retain your current customers and continue your marketing activity and continue your brand storytelling activities to build the pipeline, so that now is the time to build that connection with your potential customers, so that when things go back to, as everybody keeps calling it, the new normal, which is not really known or might not be very new, but as things go back to that, then people will be, you will be in the consideration mindset for your potential customers. And really, there are three things. When I thought about, okay, what is the foundation of great storytelling? It's really these three things that pop out at me. And what's interesting with these three things is, this is what we also say on YouTube that you really need to base all of your content on. First one is purpose. Everything that you put out there, every column, every video, everything that you put out has to be purposeful. And secondly, it needs to be authentic. It needs to come from a place of authenticity that you truly believe as a brand. So a lot of these are driven by your values and your mission. We'll get into a little bit of the questions that you might want to ask yourself as you're digging deeper into this a little bit later when we're thinking about our content territory that you might want to get into. And finally, empathetic. Because without empathy, you can't really connect with somebody. And what I wanted to do is show you a little video about empathy from Brené Brown. Some of you may have seen this, but if not, it's just it's about a 2-minute video, but I don't think I would do it justice if I tried to explain empathy myself. So I'm going to leave it to Brené Brown to explain it to you. It's quite heartwarming. This is one of my favorite videos of all time. And I think it's just great to have, not just in our professional lives, but in our personal lives too. I never really knew the difference in that detail between empathy and sympathy. And I absolutely loving the animation when the deer has that massive eye roll. It's just brilliantly done. Well done to the RSA. And talking about empathy, I think now is the time to really address the pandemic and give you some examples of how other brands have approached it. And I have varying degrees of examples for you guys. So from the very, I would say, simple engagements that you could do to something that's a lot more involved. So there's three levels, let's say, low, medium, and high. In the very basic end, I'm sure you must have seen many examples of this. I've seen a ton of brands really play around with their logos to really support the social distancing rules around. From McDonald's to Audi to Volkswagen to Nike, it's a really great way for people to be part of that message, to bolster that message, and to be part of that. This is an emphatic response, right? This is a very empathetic response. And this is very simple, so this is very easy to do. If you wanted to do something a little bit more engaged, I have another example. This one is from the Getty Museum in LA, which obviously is closed and will be for the foreseeable future until things open up in California. And what they've done is, because they have no visitors coming in and all of the artwork is physical, their team has been thinking about how to engage with their normal customers, let's say, and potential people who might have thought about Getty or never thought about Getty Museum or never thought about going there. This is a brilliant activation. What they've done is they've realized that a lot of the adults are now, stuck at home with their kids, right? A lot of parents are stuck at home with their kids. And these kids are pretty much all on Animal Crossing. And if you haven't heard of Animal Crossing, it's kind of like The Sims. It's a virtual life simulation game on Nintendo, and a lot of kids are playing it, and I must say a lot of adults are playing it too. So, and this is where you have your own island, and you kind of decorate it, you build different buildings, etc., and people can come and visit you on the island. It's just a virtual life simulation. what the Getty Museum staff have done brilliantly is they've taken all of the artwork that's in the Getty Museum that's now public in terms of copyright, so they could actually do this. They've taken it and created these pixelized artworks that represent the actual piece of art in the Getty Museum and made it available into the game Animal Crossing for free. So you can scan a barcode and you can get that Monet. And actually this screenshot is coming from a user's island where they've created a room in their house, which is a museum, and all of the artwork is from the Getty Museum. This is a brilliant, brilliant way of marketing, right? Because people who go to that island and visit, they may never have heard of the Getty Museum, but they see a piece of artwork, they see it in its pixelated form, and they're thinking to themselves, or they might think to themselves, when the museums open up, I'm going to go and check that artwork. I really like the colors. This is such a great way of engaging with a consumer base that you currently can't engage in because you're literally closed. And the final piece I wanted to show you, this is a 1-minute video that the Greek tourism ministry started a campaign called Greece from Home, but this wasn't a traditional campaign that they would do as the Greek tourism ministry, because it is very much led by creators from Greece. So it's not really them. They're working with Greek pastry chefs, restaurateurs, small business owners, etc. And what they're trying to do is bring the Greek culture to your home. And it's such a brilliant campaign because right now people can't travel. Yes, and Greece gets a ton of, most of their GDP comes from tourism. So what they're trying to do right now is make sure that they are in the mindset. So when things open up again and flights go back up and people feel safe enough to actually travel and take that leap, Greece will be the first country that comes to their mind, and they will actually go to Greece instead of somewhere else. So I just want to show you this 1-minute campaign video that they produced. What this campaign has started, so they upload very regularly, and you'll see more videos down here. Dimitris from home, Stefanos from home, that's Stefanos Tsitsipas, a tennis player, for instance. So they're collaborating with really well-known Greek names and essentially collaborating with them on this channel. But what I've also noticed is that this is their owned content, right? This is what they're creating. But what this has generated, especially with the hashtag, is this generated a ton of earned content. So if you go on Twitter and search for this hashtag, you will see thousands and thousands of tweets from everybody who are sharing, oh, I just saw this and it reminded me when I went to such and such island in Greece last year. I wish I was at that beach, and they post that photo of that beach. This is such a brilliant way to generate from owned to earned media. Love it. So now that was the storytelling part of it and why it's so important. Now I'm going to get into a little bit more detail as to why and how. If you really remember 3 things about why you should do YouTube, it's because of these 3 things, and those 3 things represent purposeful connection. So the first one is about reach, right? YouTube reaches now 2 billion people in the globe every single month, and it can be navigated in 80 different languages. It's the biggest video platform out there. And you may or may not know this, but YouTube is the 2nd search engine after Google, before Bing, before everybody, before everything else. It's an incredible place for discovery, and you will see why that's important in a minute. And finally, YouTube really cares about watch time. They don't really care about views as much, they care about watch time, because watch time means purposeful connection. Watch time means intent. They're actually spending time with you and your brand for longer than 5 seconds while they're scrolling on Instagram or somewhere else. So it's really, really purposeful connection. And people watch over an hour a day on YouTube, and that's just on mobile. This is also true in the UK and also in the US. And this is pre-pandemic, right? So right now, when people are cooped up at home, I expect that number to be a lot higher. So then the next step really is to broaden your content category. So when you're thinking about what content to produce, the first things that come to mind is oh, how are we going to market our product? Let's cover the features of our product or service. What I would challenge you to do is to think of your content territory as a lot wider than that, and really base it not just on your product, but your values. So go back to your values. So when we engage with a brand on this type of work, before we even think about any kind of content brainstorming, this is the first thing we do. And we talk to the product team, we talk to the PR, we talk to marketing, we talk to sales. We try and understand what is the value that's connecting all of these people towards one end. Super, super important. So your inspiration, your mission, what do you advocate for? And then you look at your audience, which I'm sure you've done this because you're marketers, right? Their passions, their fears and goals. But what we're trying to do is broaden that overlap areas to go beyond just your product, so that you can kind of think about other content that you can do that still resonates with your audience, pulls them in and introduces them to your product or service. And when we think of how people find your content on YouTube, what you will see is kind of like an hourglass, a tilted hourglass shape. But what I'm trying to do is there's two ways that people enter into YouTube, from the left and the right. When people enter YouTube from the left, what we call them are browsers. So these are the people that go to youtube.com and say, YouTube, I don't know what to watch, show me something. So they'll go to YouTube and they'll literally look on their homepage for something that piques their interest. So for that use case, what you could do is what we call a hero piece of content. And this is really this is really something that you do not that often. I would say maximum like once a quarter, if not less actually. 1 to 2 times a year is normal. These are really big piece contents and the idea is to raise broad awareness and support major brand moments. This is where you're trying to create inspiring new content and very emotional piece of content. I'll show you an example there, but the idea there is to be on the YouTube homepage and get those browsers to discover your brand. If you go to the right side, this is the other way people come to YouTube. People will go to youtube.com and they'll immediately start searching. They won't look at anything algorithmically presented to them in the homepage. They'll search for relevant content. So what you want to do is create a set of content that then appeals to that user base, which we call the help content. So this is what we call pull content, right? Because they're searching for it and you're trying to pull them in. And this is always on evergreen. So this is the typical how-to stuff that you can really be part of with your brand. And then where you meet, where all of these kind of viewers meet is in the middle, which hopefully, right, they discover you through browsing or through searching. And then they want to look at what else you have on the channel. And that what else is the hub. And this is probably the majority of the videos that you will produce, because this is about engaging your core consumers with regular scheduled push content, because that's what your subscribers will look from you. And if you want somebody to subscribe to the channel, you need to go beyond the hero and the help stuff and really build the hub. And this is where that content category and thinking about your brand values is super, super important, because this is how you generate the hub ideas. And in terms of how they kind of look in terms of a timeline. So if you look at this from as a timeline and your watch time on the y-axis, really the help videos, you don't really expect a ton of viewership from them, but they're there, they're always on, and you're trying to pull people as much as possible to feed the funnel of viewership. And then you move them into hub. And in the hub, it's really around series and formats. So behind the scenes or collaborations. These are the things that you can do on a regular basis. You create episodic content. I'll share an example in the next slide. And this is what you want people to come back to the channel for. Once they've found it, they come back for the hub. And then the hero pieces of content, you expect them to go viral. And that's why you don't do them very often. Their budget usually is a lot higher. So you can't really do multiples of these. So here's an example. I wanted to show you an example from the automotive industry. There's a couple of more brand examples next. But in terms of when we look at BMW's channel, if you haven't looked on their channel, please do go ahead and look. On the hero side, they kind of do a hero video, I would say, twice a year, 3 times a year. The most recent one, this was 6 months ago. It received 22.5 million views since release. It's called The Small Escape. It's about a BMW Isetta during when Berlin was split in two. And it's about how I think it's 4 or 6 people who were smuggled in a BMW from East Berlin to West Berlin. So it's a really emotional story. It's quite short. There's no talking in it at all, but it's shot in a very cinematic manner. And it's really evoking a sense of compassion that BMW then stands for. So they're kind of allocating the brand with that emotional response. And then what they do is they have a ton of hub videos. So if you go there for them, hub videos are like the best features of their newest car. And what they recently started is a vertical video format, which is supported on YouTube. It's called BMW Today, and it's episodic. I literally copied and pasted the titles from their channel. So this one is called BMW Today Episode 3. This was posted 6 days ago when I put it in the deck, so a few days ago, and it's generated 28,000 views, which is very, very good for a piece of content. And it's really kind of behind the scenes of what's happening at BMW today. And they, of course, feature a car. But this is really great for car enthusiasts, right? If you're a BMW enthusiast, this is what you come back to the channel for, because you get to see behind the factory. And then finally, help videos. With these ones, they try to educate. So they have a ton of how-to stuff. This one is about the new assisted driving view. This was posted 4 months ago. It has 250,000 views, which is quite high actually for a help video. But I kind of, one thing to keep in mind is that the help and the hub stuff can kind of overlap and mix depending on what sector you're in the content category. So for instance, if I was looking at Chanel, and Chanel's doing a lot of makeup tutorials, it's very similar for that to be a hub video and a help video, because it's kind of what people expect from you. And it's also very search friendly. That's what we mean for the help side. this is the final slide that I wanted to leave you with, because I only showed you BMW. I want to show you a couple of other examples of brands and where they lay in terms of content territory. What you have here is on the x-axis, self-creation on the left, which means they only, the brand creates their own videos with only their own means, and they don't really collaborate at all with anybody. On the right side is complete collaborative creation. This could be user-generated content submitted to the brand and then reused, or it could be actual collaborations with actors, influencers, etc. So that's on the x-axis. And on the y-axis, at the bottom, you have core interest, which is, if you're BMW, for instance, just doing things about cars, for instance, is core interest. And then adjacent interest is really looking at it from a lifestyle perspective. So that's why BMW I put in the lower left corner, because they're very much in self-creation. They have a couple of podcasts where they have guests, but it's very much driven by them and by the core interest. The last thing was about GoPro, where I was saying that GoPro is kind of like the exact opposite of BMW, because they don't create their own content. Actually, most of the time, they create it through submissions of their fans. So they have a lot of collaborative creations on their YouTube page, and they kind of go from core interest to more adjacent interest, which is more about like a lifestyle approach. Disney does similar. Lego has an incredible channel. Definitely have a look at that. And they are kind of in the middle of both of these things, kind of almost smack in the middle. But I wanted to show you different examples of how successful brands are kind of creating their own brand narrative with different strategies. And finally, and this is literally a 2-minute thing, this is really the next, it's like a taster of what would be next. So once you define like your content territory, once you define what your hero ideas would be, your hub and your help, and then you kind of get into the gears of actually executing a YouTube channel and YouTube content, this is really, in my mind, you may have seen this before, the 10 fundamentals of YouTube. I really think of it, it stands from foundational aspects of inspiration, making sure it's sustainable, making sure it's consistent, and then getting viewers and engaging. But this is literally this would be its own kind of, I would say, 1 hour discussion with examples. But I wanted to show you in case you were kind of already ready to move to that stage to kind of see, okay, what's my next kind of to-do list, so to speak.
Sure. And perhaps if that's something that people have an interest in, they could let us know in their feedback if that's something that they've got an appetite for later, because there's clearly so much to explore there.
Absolutely. So thank you for that. So maybe we move into questions now.